Okay, section 3, we want to get to some actual evacuation and execution of the evacuation. We've talked about the threat of fire. We've talked about the need to realize that this is the most likely threat we're going to face by any way of type of disaster for our consumers. We need to take this fire threat very real. It is a very real threat that very likely could occur to us in our places where we work or in our places where we live. We need to make sure that we recognize the seriousness of the threat. We've talked about the fact that the best way to prevent ourselves from ever having to suffer the consequences of that threat is to prevent the fire from happening in the first place. The best fire, or the best time to fight a fire, is before the fire ever occurs. It's the only way we can guarantee life safety, lack of injury, lack of property loss, and continuity of business. Should our best efforts fail, should it come to the place where our prevention hasn't worked, some mistake has been made, or something has occurred which we, in fact, could not have prevented, we need to know how to handle that, what to do should the fire event occur. And that's Unit 3. That's our evacuation execution piece. I need to emphasize this again. You are the first responders. I've done a lot of work, a lot of research work in study of disasters and people's response to disasters and people's response in disaster situations. Everything from campus shootings to hostage situations to fire emergencies to plane crashes, all of those kind of things. The one thing that comes out of all of that is that regular people are the most important factor in the outcome of the disaster every time. It's not the emergency responders that are the most significant component of survival. It's not the first responders who have the greatest impact on how many people get out of a building fire, or how many people escape in a plane crash, or how many people survive in a hostage situation. It's regular people who, whether because of education and knowledge did the right things, or by instinct did the right things, or in some way had some kind of inspiration to do the right things, but those regular people in the first moments of that incident who were there at the time were the ones that had the greatest impact. So you as staff members in your residences need to realize that you are the first responders. When that fire event occurs, what you do in those first minutes before the fire department arrives is the most significant factor in the survival and welfare of your consumers. You are the first responders. So what do we do in case of a fire alarm? There are two things. Get out, and number two, stay out. I work in the campus program, and we had an off-campus fatal fire in Plattsburgh a couple of years ago. And we did the investigation, and after the investigation we had talked to a number of people who were witnesses, a number of people who had actually been in the building, and those types of scenarios. And we had 4 different people that placed the person who died outside of the fire building and safe. But for some reason he went back in and died on the 3rd floor of the building. 2 things you need to do: get out and stay out. Now, let me back up just a little bit and talk about the fire department interface, because it's critical that you know the specific building you're dealing with, and that you know what the fire department's response and expectations are going to be for that building. One of the stories we've uncovered, and one of the things that we've used as illustrations, is a fire that occurred in a supportive living type facility. There were several consumers who had apartments within this high-rise building. The fire department responded to a fire in a 78-year-old woman's apartment. When they got there, they were able to confine the fire to the room of origin. The problem that they experienced was that the rest of the residents opened their doors, wandered out into corridors, which were filled with smoke because of the fire, did all of the wrong things in relationship to that fire. In that scenario, what the fire department had told them to do, they'd actually had face-to-face communication or verbal communication through the door. What the fire department had told them to do is keep your door closed and stay where you are. They did not do that. And because of that, the fire department now had to withdraw their operations from suppression of the fire and go into a rescue mode where we're helping these people with evacuation, moving them out of the building. Had they done what the building was designed for, with fire doors and construction rating and all of those kind of things, had they done what the building was designed for, and stayed where they were with the door closed, that would have been the safest place for them. The fire department could have suppressed the fire. They would have cleared the smoke from the corridor, and they would have all been okay. As it worked out, they had 4 people who were transported to the hospital with inhalation issues because of that smoke. So when I say get out and stay out, that's the standard rule. That's always the standard rule. Evacuate. We go back to the speed of the fire. We go back to the smoke and the darkness and all of those things we talked about in the first unit. And we say that you have no time to do anything except escape. With the caveat that there may be scenarios where the building is designed with a construction model or with construction features or fire systems features that makes staying in place the better option. When we talk about high-rise buildings, I think we mentioned this with some of you in classes we've been in before, but high-rise buildings by design do not have stairwells with a capacity to take a full evacuation of the building at one time. That's why in a high-rise building, your alarm system usually has a PA system of some kind, and the PA system will have someone who comes on from the command post and says we are evacuating the fire floor or the alarm floor, one floor above and one floor below. Once that has happened and they've assessed the situation, they may begin adding floors and evacuating subsequent levels or whatever they may need to do, or they may just have everybody stay in place. But the stairwell, should everybody decide to evacuate at once, will become packed and literally will keep people from getting out of the building. So we have to deal with building specific and we have to deal with fire department specific. What is the building designed to do, and what is the fire department expectation and operation in relationship to that building? That's why I'm saying you're miles ahead of so many other people by having that fire department interface, because very often that doesn't happen and the fire department shows up and doesn't know the building, or the fire department shows up and the staff doesn't know what the fire department expectations are, and they're taking operations that actually hinder what fire department needs to do. But the standard rule is get out and stay out because of that speed and heat and all of those things we talked about. Don't delay. We need to escape. There's nothing in the building by way of property or the building itself that's worth dying for. There are no heroics in getting injured or killed to try to save property. That's not why we're there. Again, we asked the question, can we beat it to the door? And the answer is, unless we do the right things immediately, probably not. So some special considerations, and the key word of this is you all know the consumer group that you work with. Special considerations are that we need to assess what the evacuation capabilities are, what the needs of our consumers are, and prearrange what we're going to do about that. The key word in all of this is prearrange. We need to have a plan. We need to know what we're going to do to provide safety and provide survival for those people we're responsible for. Dennis Milletti said, but individuals under perceived risk, the public totally discounts low probability, high consequence events. The individual says it's not going to be this plane, this bus, or we could say this home, this time. Everybody thinks that the disaster, because it doesn't happen frequently. If we look at OPW, or we look at the voluntary community, how many fatal fires have we actually had in those populations within our programs? And the answer is not many. I go back to the fact that one death is too many if it could have been prevented. But the fact is that it's a high consequence event when it does happen. The problem we have with that is we get into that experience isn't a good teacher mode again, and we start to believe that because it hasn't happened, it won't happen. So we get lax in the precautions we take, we get lax in our prevention programs, and we just sort of get apathetic to the fact that it could actually occur, and when it does, the consequences are irreversible. People routinely overestimate how well their minds will perform in a real crisis. Ask someone what they would do in a fire situation, and they usually will express some measure of confidence about their ability to react properly. Very often the other side of that is they're clueless, very honestly, because they haven't even thought about it. But we think we will do well, in spite of the reality of not knowing that we wouldn't. In repeated surveys, almost everyone overestimated the time they believed they had to escape from a fire. We talked about that. The standard answers are 5, 10, and 15 minutes. We have seen, demonstrated fairly dramatically that that is not the case. So we go to the training advantage. What do we do about that? Early on, we said that there are things that we can do, things that we can know, which will definitely have a positive impact on the outcome should an event occur in our circumstances tomorrow. And the major one of those things is the training advantage. And when I say training advantage, I'm talking about, again, house-specific, staff-specific training related to fire evacuation and fire survival. This class is an overview. This class is intended to give you some decision-making tools to help you sort out what to do in those situations. We know the fire is fast and hot, so we need to do things related to our consumers that will help us compensate for the fact that they may have a greater difficulty in evacuating than the general population, those type of things. But the training has to be specific to the environment in which we actually work and move. We have to know our consumers, we have to know our buildings, we have to know our fire departments, and we have to know what each of those will provide or not provide in relationship to safety. So the goal of training is that we need confidence, but that comes from realistic rehearsal. And the question that we would have to ask in relationship to our homes is, how realistic is the drill or evacuation training that we do in our houses? Do we truly go the span of what might be involved? Do we do drills with varying locations of simulated fire and what we might have to do? Can I tell a story? A story came out of a home, a board and care facility, where they simulated where the fire would be. And the staff did exactly the right thing. They went to their most endangered consumer. They moved them out of a secondary exit because the fire would have impeded, if it was a real fire, would have impeded access through the main entrance that they normally use. They did exactly the right thing, moved the consumer, got them out of the exit, the secondary exit, and then came back in the front exit and walked by the fire to get to number 2 that they needed to remove from the house. How realistic is our drill? How realistic is what we do in our training situations? The idea is that we want to get to the place where the response to the alarm or the response to the fire incident is automatically right. We want the behavior to become so ingrained and so well practiced that when the alarm goes off, our consumers and our staff automatically have, as part of that fear response or as part of that reaction, doing the right thing. It's automatic. Kevin was talking about a police officer. When a police officer gets in a difficult situation, his removal of his weapon or his targeting or the words he uses to the suspect, all of those things are automatic. He doesn't stop and say, okay, now what should I do? What should I say to him? How are we going to make this work? How do I get him to back down? How do I talk him out of this? What do I do if he shoots at me? None of that is in thought process at all. It all has become so well trained and so well ingrained that it's like instinct. And that's what we want to do in our fire survival situations. We want our training to be such that we bring people to the automatic response being the right response. And there are some various things we can do to make that happen. The issue is we don't sit there wondering what to do. We do it. It becomes automatic. Richard Gist said, kids remember stop, drop, and roll because we make them rehearse it, not because we make them say it. In adult education, very often we get into that, I told you, you ought to know this mode. But we need to have them do it. And we need to have them do it as realistically as possible in order to ingrain that behavior. Confidence comes from doing. It's the combination of mind and knowledge and physical action and bringing all of those senses together and making all of those things work so that we remember it and it becomes ingrained in our behavior. The trick is to embed the behavior in the subconscious so that it is automatic, almost like the rest of the fear response. The actual threat is not nearly as important as the level of preparation. Anxiety is directly related to my fear of the situation. Very often we use the word panic. Panic is, in most situations of survival, a misnomer. People are not truly panicked. What they truly are is that they are fearful that they are not going to be able to have a positive outcome on the result of this particular incident. Panic is just helter-skelter, whatever kind of comes, this crazy behavior in response to an emergency. That very seldom actually happens. People do something, and they do something to them that seems to them to be reasonable. They will take an action that they believe is going to have a positive outcome. The problem is that unless they have been trained in what that response is or what that action needs to be, they very likely will do the wrong thing. But to them it's reasonable. Panic says unreasoned, just chaotic activity. That's almost never the case in an emergency situation. The person is doing something that they believe is a reasonable contributor to their safety or contributing to the positive outcome. Panic arises when we believe we have no ability to have a positive effect on the situation in which we exist and the outcome on the other end. The station nightclub, there was panic in the station nightclub. The reason was 500 people packed onto a dance floor, not knowing how to get out, and everybody headed for the same door. And the realization that no matter what I do standing in the middle of this location, there are 100 people between me and that door, and I'm not going to get there. That's when panic ensues. The fact that I don't believe I can have a positive outcome. Now, if I can do training, if I can do preparation, if I can get people in a mode where they believe they in fact can do something that will positively impact this situation, I've reduced the anxiety and stress level, I've taken away the panic component, and the outcome is much more likely a positive one. And one of the scenarios I came up with not long ago was where the person who was working in the house had never before been in the building, much less worked that location. That changes the whole world. That literally changes the world. So, yes, all of those specific things. Exactly right. Exactly right. The more prepared we are, the more in control we feel, the less fear we experience, and the more likely we are to do the right things. Okay, residential board and care, multiple death, fires. The most common, repeated, major contributing factors are these. Number one, lack of automatic sprinklers. I think we saw in the video earlier that sprinklers make a radical difference. The floor temperature at 2 minutes being 89 degrees instead of 216 degrees. That is huge in the time we have to evacuate and the likelihood of survival. Now obviously that's not economically feasible in every facility. A lot of the places where we work are retrofits, and we've taken other buildings and adapted them and those kind of things. But if sprinklers can be provided, that's a huge asset. And the reports all say that the lack of residential sprinklers had an impact in the fatalities. Wells had a sprinkler system, by the way. So don't think that that's a gimme. Don't think that just because the building has a sprinkler system that now we're safe and we can get apathetic about what we need to do in the building. Again, it's behavior issues that are involved as well. I've seen sprinkler systems where the pipe was so corroded that yes, it was there, and yes, the head was sitting there, and yes, it looked like you had a sprinkler system, but you couldn't get water through it. So yes, absolutely. The water main, there's a water problem with the city or municipal water coming in, or yeah, there are a lot of things that can happen. It's a component. You're right that it's not the only thing that has to happen. The combination of working smoke alarms and a residential sprinkler system in the private population world, in the general population, reduces the likelihood of fire death by over 80%. The combination of those two things, early notification and a measure of the sprinklers holding the fire, containing the fire, and allowing a greater evacuation time, over 80% better than a house without those things. And the sprinkler system adds about another 40% over the smoke alarm by itself. And in most situations it would cost less than wall-to-wall carpeting. The next edition of the code will require sprinkler systems in all new construction for 1- and 2-family residences. So it's gotten that far. All right. The number 2 contributing factor was doors open, the room where the fire originated. It wasn't contained. We'll talk about that in a minute, that the door wasn't closed. Closing the door can have a dramatic effect. We'll show you that in a minute. Doors open to stairways or unprotected vertical openings allowed the fire and smoke to spread. And ineffective staff and resident training or response. And that's where we get to the specifics again. The overview, the knowledge for the decision-making process is critical, but they have to know the house. And the harm that was caused in the residence that I talked about a minute ago, where the employee had never before worked in that facility, had no idea the condition of the consumers, what assistance they needed. I mean, you can read the evacuation plan. but not truly knowing or not truly being trained in how to respond in that facility caused the negative outcome. Where you actually work, at each location. So if you're a floater, and this week you're working 2 days here and 3 days somewhere else, and next week you're a day here and a day somewhere else and a day somewhere else, you need to know these things for every location where you work. Not an overview of it, but each specific facility. First of all, you have to know the evacuation plan for the house. That's the base. That's like the Bible of where we start the whole thing. You have to know the evacuation plan for the house. You have to know the layout of the house. Where are the second exits? What might be the impediments to egress? What might be the things I would have to deal with by way of functions or services being performed for the consumer that I might have to negotiate or navigate should a fire occur and should we have to evacuate or should action have to be taken. We have to know the layout of the house, where things are, how I move through that, the furniture issues that Gary talked about a minute ago. How would I navigate around those things, or what do I need to do with those? We need to know the location of each individual and their capability and needs. We have to know specific to each person what has to happen to provide their survival or to assist in their survival. Individual capabilities. A lot of that is in your assessment program. But we'll look at a couple of things that you need to do on an ongoing basis as well. Impairments may reduce the individual's chance of safety. We've talked about that a little bit in one of the earlier units. What that person is capable of doing for self-preservation or on their own without assistance is a major factor in whether or not they will survive, and what we need to do to compensate for that. Limited means of egress. There may be a reduction in options for them to escape because of what they're dealing with medically or by way of their abilities or by way of their disabilities. There may be wheelchair things that make certain exiting not possible. There may be issues they have to navigate by way of oxygen supplements that they need to carry, or just a whole lot of things that can happen that change specific to that person how the house is used or what we need to do in order to make that house function in a survival or evacuation situation. Limited mobility. This is one of the things we need to keep track of on a daily basis. It could very well be that our assessment says that the person is at a high level of self-preservation, they need minimal assistance from staff, but if that person breaks their leg tomorrow, doesn't that all change? If that person is ill and there's flu or there's some kind of thing that has caused some measure of medical difficulty, that can change on a day-to-day basis. So when we say the limited mobility or the assessment, yes, there's an evaluation that occurs. And yes, we have a form that says that, and yes, that's included in the plans, but we need to monitor that day to day to make sure that we're keeping track of what that consumer may need at any given moment. The newly disabled, somebody that has, again, a broken leg, something that's happened that has caused a disability that contributes something that wasn't there before. And the resident's characteristics. The characteristics of the building may very well have an impact on the specific person and their ability to self-preserve or their need for assistance related to that particular house. Life Safety Code evacuation capability priorities. Prompt evacuation capabilities, slow, and impractical. And you all know that those are based on a comparison to the evacuation expectations or times of the general population. So a slow evacuation capability, it means that it would take them longer than someone in the general population facing the same circumstance to be able to evacuate. Impractical means they wouldn't be able to do that on their own without some kind of assistance. So those are the things we need to keep track of, and that, again, is consumer by consumer, and we need to take actions related to the evacuation plan and related to our actual actions within that fire emergency which compensate for those kind of things. If we have 7 impractical evacuation persons in a residence and 1 or 2 staff members on at night, that could be a significant problem unless we have some safety features built in that allow us to be able to have a greater evacuation time than may normally be prescribed. So we have to take all of those things into account. We have to make accommodation for whatever those needs may be. The key word there is that it can be reliably proven that they are able to evacuate to that level. So for a prompt evacuation capability to be logged, we have to say that we have reliably proven, we have demonstrated that the people within our facility are able to evacuate at the same level expected of the general population. We have to be able to demonstrate that. It has to be reliably proven. 7, assessment are risk factors in the consumer assessment. It has to be performance-based, and we must be based on his or her demonstrated ability to evacuate a structure in an emergency. The risk that the individual will resist leaving. We have people who will actually have a negative response to the fire alarm. As opposed to evacuating, they actually will hide. Many folks in the community in which you live, and many elderly folks as well, have the same response as little children. Fire deaths among little children are often found where the kids are hiding in a closet under a sink. They, instead of escaping, instead of doing the right thing and getting out, they actually hide somewhere or get in a worse position than they would have been by leaving. And we have individuals in the population, you have consumers who will take those same type of responses. We need to know that and what we need to do to counter that. Response to fire drills. That's one of the things that have been talking about. What do we do with our drills? What are we training our consumers to do or not do in a drill situation? If I have 4 fire drills, and for every one of those 4 fire drills, when the alarm goes off, the consumers, either by themselves or with assistance, go to a point of safety. It's always the same point of safety, which we have designed in the plan. It's always through the same exit, and in 5 minutes, we always go back in. What have we trained them to do? In the real emergency, when the fire department is there and the flames are coming out of the building, we have many of our consumers whose natural response, now ingrained as behavior that they've learned, will be that in 5 minutes I'm going back inside. That becomes an issue. We need to make sure that we know what their response to the drill is and what we are teaching them in that drill scenario or in that drill context. That's the place where you can't specifically, word by word, action by action, necessarily prescribe those things for a staff member. There may be points where they have to look at this and say, fire's fast and fire's hot, and I can't do that option. I have to look for something else, but they've got some decision-making tools to maybe make some of those choices and have a better outcome. But there needs to be balance in that because, again, as has been talked about, what are we teaching them? And what is the response to the fire drill? What happens when that alarm goes off? If it's the 12th time this year and nobody's telling them that it's coming or teaching them the behavior or instructing in what they're supposed to do, what have we actually ingrained? So we need to make sure that we work on the training component, the idea, and Perry used the word before, it's practice. Maybe we should call them evacuation practices or something, because the issue with the drill is, what are we teaching? We want to teach them the correct behavior so that they don't have to stop and think about it in the actual emergency situation, and that's that. The individual's response to instructions. Do they need somebody to tell them what to do? If I tell them once, leave by that door, will they do it? Or do they need somebody to repeatedly tell them, okay, we need you to go down the corridor, we need you to go out the door, we need you to go over by the van, we need you to stay there? What level of instruction and what level of continuous care and progression has to occur for that person to escape and remain in a safe place? The individual's mobility impairments, the resources necessary to overcome that. If you have a couple of staff members in a 7-consumer home and all of them have to be moved by staff to a conveyance and out of the building, we need to make sure that that is taken care of, that we take whatever provisions we need to make those assistance things happen on behalf of our consumers. The need for extra help. There may be people who are not in an impractical evaluation, but still need constant attention by a staff member to help them effect evacuation. What is their waking response to alarms? If the alarm occurs at night, will they actually awake and be alert enough to perform what we've taught them to perform in the evacuation drill? We need to know that ahead of time. Again, the key word in all of this is prearranged. and demonstrate it. We need to reliably expect this level of performance by our people. And will the individual lose consciousness in an emergency? We have folks who, anxiety-wise or for other reasons, actually have reduced capability as an emotional or as a response to, a mental response to what happens in an emergency situation. Will they shut down and not be able to function at all? We need to know all of those things in advance. So where you work, at each location, we have to know what we've talked about, and we have to know the location of all exits. We have to know the secondaries or maybe even the tertiaries, as opposed to just the main exit where we always go in and go out. We need to make sure that we have those things located and we can use them. We need to know the alarm type. What do I mean by alarm type? Well, there are a couple of different types. There are supervised alarms, and when the alarm goes off in the building, there's an automatic notification. That's a fire department. That's a supervised alarm, but there are also alarms that are not supervised. They're local alarms, and the alarm only sounds in the building where the alarm is, which means that the fire department is not coming. That the alarm's going off in the building, and we may be doing the evacuation thing, but nobody else knows about this. So somebody has to take the function of calling the fire department, making notification, and make sure that they are dispatched. So we need to know the alarm type for the specific building that we have, and you have all of those across the span of your residences. What do I do if the alarm sounds? Don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. Buffalo area, voluntary. Consumer finished a shower and said that he smelled something that smelled like heat or smoke in the bathroom. Staff member went in, didn't find anything that looked like an obvious problem, pretty much let it go, and the fire department was not dispatched. They did not come. A little while later, there was another indication, because a smoke alarm went off, that there might have been a fire in the building. The monitoring service called back to the residents, said, do you have a fire? Do you need the fire department? And the staff member had done their own investigation and pretty much determined that there was no problem, so they called off the dispatch of the fire department. A while later, there was another fire alarm, smoke alarm activation. The alarm service calls back. This time, the staff member is out behind the building smoking, and they were ready to call off the fire department dispatch again because they didn't think there was a problem. But when they turned and looked, there was smoke coming from the roof. If the alarm goes off, there's a reason. And what we communicate in the fire service and what we communicate in the college community and what I would communicate to you is a fire alarm is a real fire until somebody with the qualifications and authority to say it's not tells you it's not. We need to assume that it is real until somebody qualified to do so proves that it's not. There were no fatalities, there were no injuries. The evacuation occurred and everybody got out of that residence okay. Huge property loss, a lot of damage. I think it was $50,000 or more. There was loss of some of the consumers' personal items and those kind of things. But every alarm is real until somebody that really knows otherwise tells us that it's not. So don't ignore the alarm and evacuate. Again, that's the standard rule. There may be situations where there's a different prescription because of building construction, because of fire systems, because of fire department interaction, where there may be variations to that. But the general rule is if the alarm goes off, execute your evacuation plan. So how do we do that? When we evacuate, what do we need to have happen? Well, first of all, we need to remove all persons in immediate danger to a safe place. What do we mean by immediate danger? That means the consumer's room is where the fire is. We need to get them out of the room where the fire is. We need to remove them from imminent danger. We need to make sure that the alarm is sounded. We need to alert everybody within the building. Shout, yell, holler, pull the alarm, whatever needs to happen to notify people in the building that the alarm has occurred, and make sure that the fire department is notified and dispatched. Whether that's a call to 911, whether the alarm makes that happen, we need to know that. Close the doors to prevent the spread of smoke and fire, and E is evacuate. Now, one of the things we need to communicate here is that these may not be strictly sequential. There may be situations where some of these things overlap. You've got multiple staff members and a couple of people are doing two of these things concurrently. There may be situations where there is a need that says I have to move to alarm instead of the remove, or I have to evacuate prior to some of these other things. So they may be happening simultaneously, they may be happening a little bit out of order, but these are the steps in the program of evacuation. And we want to talk about the issue of personal safety. And this becomes very hard. This is contrary to what most of our staff members, what most fire service personnel, most firefighters, almost instinctively would do. It sounds really selfish, but as a staff member, you need to make your personal safety the priority. As dedicated and committed as you are to those people in your responsibility, you have to make your safety the priority. Because if you do not remain safe, if you do not remain functional, you not only are not able to help anybody else to a positive end, but you yourself become a victim, and you take more resources that now are diverted away from those who need the help. Your personal safety is the #1 issue, and we say that sounds kind of selfish, but the reality is that's the only way to be of benefit to somebody else, is if you remain safe and if you remain able to provide assistance to others. So when we say remove if you can do that without causing your own harm. All right? Only if it can be done and remain safe. Prioritize the assistance to those individuals who will benefit most. Again, that's a really difficult statement to make. But if there is someone who is in such danger that you cannot stay safe and provide help to them, you move to somebody else. That's just the reality of the situation. You are not firefighters. You are not trained rescuers. You do not have the equipment and the training to be able to combat the circumstances that have been thrust on you without against your will in that fire situation. You didn't create this problem. All you can do is do the best you can to make it better or reduce the magnitude of the consequences. You're not firefighters. Nobody expects you to be firefighters, and nobody expects you to spend your life saving somebody in a futile effort. You need to make sure your personal safety is the priority. There may be individuals that you cannot help. There may be a point in time where you just cannot make a difference in this situation, but you can't make yourself a victim in response to that. You didn't create this problem. All you can do is your very best to make it better. Okay, second is alert, alarm. Again, depending on what the alarm is, depending on what your phone system is, and again, this is why it's so critical to know your fire department and know what the expectations are there. There are places very close to where I live where they still use a 7-digit fire number. You can call 911, but it's going 3 or 4 counties away, and you're going to be delayed 4 to 5 minutes perhaps in the dispatch of the fire department because of where that answering point is for the 911 system. If you dial 911, you will get somebody, but it may not be somebody who can provide the immediate help that another system or another phone number would provide. So we need to know what that is. Where do I call? What do I do in order to make that notification take place? What do we do to report an emergency? If a fire is discovered, we pull the alarm if it's not already sounding, and if that alarm is available, we call 911 or the appropriate 7-digit number for the fire department. We use the nearest safe phone. One of the most horrific things in my entire working experience and fire service experience was I spent 11 years as a county dispatcher. I took a phone call on 911 line one night, and this woman is yelling in the phone that she has a fire in her house. And what had happened is, I found out from the investigators later, she had taken a sandwich to her husband who was on oxygen. She was a smoker, and she'd put the cigarette down in an ashtray on the nightstand beside the bed. She'd taken the sandwich to him, he was in the bed, and he took the oxygen mask off to eat the sandwich and laid it beside him. The cigarette ignited the furniture. She had gone to the phone to call 911. He escaped the fire. He rolled off the bed, pulled himself out the front door of the house. He had escaped. As I'm talking to her on the phone, trying to confirm the address, it was before Enhanced 911, we didn't actually have the address on the screen. I'm trying to confirm where the address is, and I hear on the other end, we're at... The last person she ever talked to was me reporting the fire, because she had gone to the back side of the bed, away from the door, behind the fire, to make the call to the fire department. Safest, or a safe phone. That may not even be in the building. But if we're going to make that call, make sure that we're in a safe place to be able to do it. For medical emergencies, we want to use the phone closest to the victim possible. And we need to give the following information: the exact address of the emergency with any location instructions that may be necessary. If you're calling in a 4-story building, 5-story building, whatever it may be, and you're on the 3rd floor in the west corner, that's critical information for the dispatch. Make sure that you tell them we're in the building. We're in the bathroom on the back side of the building, or whatever it may be. Give any location information that you can, and the exact address. The phone number that you're calling from, the importance of that is that if there is a problem finding you, they are able to call back and get further information if that's necessary. So make sure that they have the phone number. They will ask for your name. That's not so they can subpoena you. The purpose of asking your name is so that when they call back that number or need more information or need someone who is familiar with what's actually going on with the incident, they know who to ask for, and we don't have to go through 3 people asking around, hey, did you call, did you call, did you call? They know who to ask for and get directly to the person that can give them the information they need. And then the nature of the emergency. What is it that you're asking for? Is it a fire? Is it an ambulance? We used to get calls fairly frequently that somebody be on the other end of the phone saying, send help now! And it could take you 3, 4, 5 minutes to discern whether that was a police, an ambulance, or a fire call. Make sure that you tell them what it is that you're asking for. Remain on the line to answer any questions and follow any instructions. And unless you're not safe, the call taker or dispatcher on the other end of the line should always hang up first. That assures that they have the information that they need and they're able to provide the service that you're requesting. The third component is close the door, or actually it's confine. But confining in the situation where we work means closing the door. And that may be a fire door that's rated to contain the fire, or it may actually just be a regular door. Even a regular door that's not fire rated can have a dramatic impact on containing the fire and smoke related to that incident. Close the doors to prevent the spread of the smoke and fire. This is actually a housing facility, and this is the damage done. The situation is a suite where there's a common area, sort of a lounge area, and then there are bedrooms off of that lounge area. This picture is you standing in that common area looking into 2 of the bedrooms. That's the fire damage. If you look at this, you'll see that the smoke alarm, the notification device, is actually blackened. The fire extinguisher is blackened. There's significant damage to everything you're looking at. The beds, the clothes, everything in the rooms have been destroyed. This is turning around and looking away from the bedrooms toward the door into the corridor, and that's the damage on the back side. Again, severe damage, thousands and thousands of dollars of damage have occurred. That's the other side of that same door. Because that door was closed, you have a little bit of smoke discoloration around the edge of the door, but the paper name tags on the door weren't even affected by the fire, and that's what the corridor looks like. Because that door was closed, it saved Union College figures $1 million in damages as to what it would have been if that fire had extended into the corridor. So close the door, confine it. If there's a fire in a room, make sure that that door is closed. Number one action related to what we can do to make this not get as bad as it could be. And then,
is it right then to say that it's safer to sleep with your bedroom door shut?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. FDNY did a program with McDonald's quite a few years ago now. The whole phrase throughout the entirety of the 30-second public service announcement was close the door, close the door, close the door. It has a dramatic effect, much, much safer. Okay, and then we evacuate. There are some types of evacuation, aids to evacuation, and things that we need to consider. We may be evacuating by zone. There are structures that are built in such a way that they have fire-rated separations, which allow you to just move people from one section of the building to another section of the building to provide their safety. We may be moving them horizontally in that kind of a context, or we may be moving them from floor to floor. I mentioned before that in a high-rise building you may have an evacuation where the instructions of evacuation are the fire floor, the floor above, and the floor below. Everybody else stay put. We may be moving people from those floors into one of the safe floors, so we may be moving them from floor to floor. The safest place, obviously, in most situations, is external to the building. If we get them out of the building where the fire is occurring, they're removed from that fire impact 100%. Some of the aids to evacuation, we've already talked about sprinklers, rated construction. We need to make sure that when we say an area of refuge, or a point of safety, that we truly have that. An area of refuge is a construction term within code that actually has very strict parameters on what must happen to prevent fire from spreading into that area. The fact that we sheetrock the walls and put a hardcore door on does not make that an area of refuge. There are very strict things that have to happen and have to be provided for it truly to be an area of refuge. So if we're in a regular residential facility, we may or may not have those built in. We need to know whether or not they truly exist. Fire doors, we already talked about confining it. That's a fire door at much, much higher level of protection, and then egress and exiting provisions. We need to always be ready. We need to have fire doors that work. We need to make sure that we're not compromising those doors. We're not chalking them open. We're not, if they don't work, if they don't fit in the frames, if they don't close properly, we need to make sure that that maintenance is done. We take care of those things. Maintain clear exit paths and no penetrations of rated walls. When we put a new computer line in, or we run a new wire, or we put a new pipe in, and we've got a wall that is actually rated as a 2-hour wall, we put a hole in that, all of that rating goes away. We suddenly have created a situation where that fire feature is totally dysfunctional. Again, we need to talk about the self-preservation capability of each individual. Staff needs to be able to meet those needs, to provide what is necessary to overcome or compromise or take care of or compensate for those capabilities or lack thereof. And we need to be at the assembly point and provide for the needs at the assembly point related to a long-term situation. We spoke to someone in one of the residences not too long ago that actually had like a go bag that had things that are needed for the consumers at the assembly point that they could just grab and go as they were evacuating the structure. But we need to account for that. If we can't put these people back in that house for an hour or 2 hours or a day, where do we take them? How do we get transportation? How do we move them to those locations? All of that has to be prearranged and taken care of. Our drills need to be as realistic as possible. We've talked about that. The only way they're going to be of value is if they're true education and training. We need to vary the times and conditions. We need to vary the reentry. We've talked about that already. A means of egress or evacuation plan doesn't count unless it's drilled and proven. We can say, oh, that's the second way out, but unless we've actually done that, unless we can actually prove that the people can actually use that, it doesn't count, and we can't count it in our evacuation plans and our drill reports. Best type of training is like the best ad. It's consistent, it's easily understood, it's specific, frequently repeated, it's personal, they see the benefit themselves, it's accurate, we do it right every time so that the performance in the actual emergency is correct, and it's targeted. It has to be specific to the specific house. We can't take a New York City high-rise evacuation plan and throw it in to a Tupper Lake for-consumer converted 1- and 2-family residence and have that work. It has to be specific to the needs of that particular facility. And what do? We practice, practice, practice. Respond immediately to every drill as if it were the real thing, and we've already talked about the fact that it is the real thing in our perception and our actions until somebody who is of an experience level, of a knowledge level, and of an authority level to tell us that it's not. All shifts, different situations, different staffing levels, different weather conditions, different possibilities for blocked exits or usable exits, all of those things are critical factors. We need to make sure that we practice those variations, various fire scenarios, and practice alternative responses. Okay, let's flip ahead here to, we know the plan, we know the fire evacuation plans, we know them specific to the site. They reflect both the physical plan and the people served. We need to make sure that the specific actions to be taken upon discovery of the fire, smelling smoke, all of those things need to be outlined in the plan. What do we do if we find the fire? What do we do if we smell smoke? We don't say, well, I don't think we've got a problem, don't bother with the fire department until the third time the smoke alarm goes off. We already talked about that. Specific actions to be taken. The planning or the preparation is the most important factor, the most important aspect of the fire plan. Staff must act decisively, promptly, and in the correct sequence to assure maximum safety. And it has to become habit. It has to be the routine. It has to be the automatic response. Talk about how to safely check and enter rooms. The same thing we tell the kids when they get to their bedroom door and we talk about the escape drills in the home. Back your hand, feel the door. If it's hot, we need to look for another exit because it's hot for a reason. There's something going on the other side of that door. Stay low, below the doorknob, open the door slowly, look in, see if there's a problem before we just go into the thing. The natural response is open the door, plow in, try to rescue somebody. We need to make sure that our personal safety is what we take into account first. And how we enter that room can be huge. If you open the door of a room that has a smoldering fire and all it's waiting for is oxygen, and you open that door and provide that oxygen, you literally can have a wall of flame. People have been blown dozens of feet across rooms and out of buildings because of that smoke explosion when oxygen was provided in that scenario. How to evaluate the evacuation priority, that's all part of the plan. Individual staff responsibilities, those are all outlined. Again, there may be situations where you need to make decisions that vary from that plan. But for the most part, we need to know the plan, we need to know how to respond. Plan should list specific responsibilities by floor rather than being assigned to specific individuals, except when an individual requires 2 staff to evacuate or has been designated to have one-to-one staffing. All of that has to be pre-planned. We have to know what all of that is and how we're going to make that happen. We have to know exactly what our job is. We have to know exactly what actions are expected, and we have to be able to do them properly and quickly as an automatic response. Identified meeting place for accountability. We need to be able to do that. One of the things that happened at Wells was people that wanted to go back in. They wanted to return into the situation. And there was an unexpected need for supervision at the assembly point because of trying to keep those people in the safe area as opposed to going back into the building. Plan should identify where people will gather after evacuating to confirm that everyone evacuated safely, and the meeting place should truly be safe. And one of the things that the fire department was talking with you about is where might that be? If my safe area on my evacuation plan is in the path of oncoming fire trucks, we may need to alter that. Again, you need to have that interface with the fire department. You need to know where those things are and how best to help each person in the home. Let's end with this. Will the fire department help? And the answer is yes. However, Chris is grinning at me because the answer yes needs some qualification. New York State has over 1,800 fire departments. We have the best municipal fire department in the world in New York City. I can take you to a place within an hour of my house where the fire department is a single 40-year-old truck on a dirt floor in a barn with 7 members. Now, will the fire department help? Yes. What will they do? Somewhere between those two things. All right? And the span is huge. The only way you can possibly know what the fire department will provide or what the fire department can do in your specific situation is to actually interface with the fire department. Actually work with them to know what they can provide. There are some generalities, though, that we can look at. How much? First of all, fire response. Yes, they will come, and yes, they will show up to put a fire out. That's their intent. A daytime call at that department with 7 members near my house, you probably will get 3 members, all of who are over 60 years old, because it's a volunteer department on a daytime call. That's the reality. So what will they be able to do? They will come expecting to put out the fire. Evacuation assistance, almost zero. On my best day in Pottersville, I will have 12 to 14 people turn out on a fire call. 12 to 14 people means a pump operator, an entry team, a backup entry team, somebody to be throwing ladders, and somebody to be laying hose for a water supply. That's 14 people. I have nobody that's going to be able to focus primarily on assistance and evacuation. Now, if rescue becomes the issue, if there are actually people trapped in a fire building, we'll take a whole different model, and some of those things will go away for the sake of rescuing people. But to assist you with evacuation in most fire departments in New York State, probably not. Assistance at the assembly point and after, helping you control or keep track of or assist individuals, that's way down the line and almost never going to happen. So what have I just said? When the fire department responds, you are the first responders. The likelihood of you having assistance in evacuating your consumers from the residence where you are is almost none. The fire department will do what they can. There may be fire departments that show up and can assist with that, but for the most part, I don't want to say you're on your own, but you are the ones with the greatest impact in the success of survival for your consumers. Knowledge and interaction with the fire department. You have to have that relationship. You have to know what their expectations are. They have to know what you have and what your needs are, and you need to work those things together. What can you do to assist the fire department? Report the evacuation progress. Tell them if everybody's out. Tell them if somebody's still trapped, somebody unaccounted for. Make them aware of those kind of things. They'll alter operations to be able to take those into account. Report individuals that may be in areas of refuge or safe areas. If you've left somebody in a secure area with some fire protection, that'll be their first place to go, and make sure that they take those people out. And then be able to give them information related to the building. They may not have been in your building before. They may not be familiar with it. So your ability to tell them where gas shutoffs are, where the alarm panel is, the electric entrance panel, if there's a sprinkler system, what the floor plan of the building, all of that is valuable information when they start making entry, either for fire suppression or rescue. And we come back to this as we close. One death is too many if it could have been prevented. 90% of every person, of the people that died in fire in the United States, didn't have to. Somewhere along that timeline of events, somebody made a bad choice. Somebody made a mistake that caused that death. Could wells happen again? The answer to that question, in greatest measure, depends on you as staff providing care for those consumers. Hope we've been helpful. Thank you so much. You've been terrific in attention and input. Thank you very much.